right. We are live.
Hey,
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining in this wonderful Wednesday,
yeah.
Wednesday the 18th. And typically, I only do this on a Monday, but I have a special treat for you all this week. Today's day 3, and we have Dr. Rock Speaks with us today to talk about the work that she's doing and talk about her upcoming book. So check it. We got 2 published authors here on your screen right now. I need you
Here
to
we
check
go.
out this greatness, just like on Monday, this Black women greatness. I want you to recognize this Black women greatness you are seeing and hearing today. Um, so thank you so much, everyone, for joining in today, whether you're watching the replay or you hop on. We appreciate you taking some time to hear us. Please leave some comments below, things that resonated with you, things you're like, I don't really agree with that. Let's keep the conversation going. So today, we're going to talk about breaking the silence, like why equity in education is still failing our schools, right? And talk about some things. Dr. Rock is going to talk about some things to help fix that, right? To address the things that are failing our schools in terms of equity. So, are you ready to dive into some thought provoking questions with Dr. Aresa Allen-Rochester, also known as Dr. Rock? Okay. We're going to explore some vital themes today of equity, of access, and the transformation education, core topics that uh, me- will deeply resonate with both her book and mine, right? Um, so let's jump right in and let's start with an introduction, Dr. Rock. So, could you start by sharing a bit about your journey and the mission behind Dr. Rock Speaks? What drives your passion for equity and access and the transformation that's needed in education? Could you speak to that for us?
Of course. Yes. So I honestly, I kind of fell into this thing called education. And in the falling, I fell in love.
There we
I
go.
literally
I
found my
love it.
passion and didn't even realize it, right? Because
Right.
um, I have just always just had a love of teaching, but I didn't know that I was going to make this be my life passion and journey, my work. And
Hmm.
so it's I will say just off the gate, it's my calling. So I started as in high school, I was like a tutor, and then in college, I worked with Black children in a group called Leadership Excellence at San Diego State University. And we, as college students, we were training and providing resources for high school students around Black history.
Hmm.
And from that work, I started my first job. I was a teacher, and it just progressed from there. So I was a classroom teacher for 11 years, then became a district level administrator. And the funny thing is, all this time, what I was doing was being a culturally relevant teacher, but I
Right.
didn't have a name for it. I
Right. As a girl.
I just thought this is just how I like to teach, and
Absolutely.
I
Yes.
bring in Black people, Black thought, and what connects to us as Black teacher. But I didn't know that that was actually a thing. And then
Yeah.
I got to Los Angeles Unified School District. I was a teacher with LAUSD, and then later became an administrator. But as a teacher in LAUSD, I fell into the tutelage of Dr. Noma Lemoyne, and
Mm.
she is an internationally known linguist, and she introduced me to this concept called African American language
Mm.
and the study of linguistics from standard English learners. And standard English learners are Black kids, Mexican American kids in particular, of any
Mhm.
other Latina group, and Native Americans and Hawaiian Americans. And the connecting piece with those babies is that they all have experienced different levels of oppression in the United States, and they have consistently been at the bottom of every single metric.
Hmm.
And the connector is that they were involuntary immigrants versus voluntary immigrants. And
Wow.
I just like when she mentioned this,
Wow.
it was like bow, something just opened. And
Yeah.
I literally then I was able to work for her for 3 years under her tutelage, and then I moved
Wow,
into
that's wonderful.
And then I became a principal. I was a principal for 14 years. And now I am doing this work in Oakland, California with Aspire Public Schools. And I am literally taking 2 decades of work in
Mhm.
transforming this district of 9 schools into a powerhouse district, particularly
Yes.
with Black and Brown children.
Oh,
So
that's so beautiful. Yes. That's so beautiful how the dots just aligned with one another and like guided you on this path where you are right now. And you find this work so meaningful. Remember talking to you a week or two ago and you talking about this role that you have at Aspire Schools and how much you love it and how much
mhm,
it really can resonate, like connects with the work that you've done. Like it took you here, which is amazing, right? The things that you value about equity, right? And that fact that you just shared, that statistic, that just blew my mind, right? Just realizing that that evidence exists. That is what that was so important for you. That's the value that you are following along throughout
right.
your journey in your career. It's so important to do that. That's amazing.
And I will say, like, when you realize that there is a fundamental difference between equity and equality, and that really clicks to you, like, I'm not asking for equality, I need equity. And actually, I
Right.
need the barriers to just be torn down so that I
Absolutely.
can get what I need to get and the babies can get what they need to get. Because oftentimes when we're looking at equity in school systems, really is just, if it's not just like a check off, it's not grounded in the foundation of culture. And
Mhm.
to give our kids what they need, and I'm speaking directly to Black and Brown children, you cannot do this work without bringing in culture. Like,
Yes.
that is the pivotal piece that connects everything. And so,
Yeah.
like with my book, and the title is "Who Holds the Keys: Cultural Keys to Unlock the Door to Transformational Leadership." That is
Mhm.
one of the pivotal pieces that I speak to. Is that it's a difference between being a transformational leader and being a culturally relevant transformational leader.
Yeah.
Because if
Yeah.
we're trying to really change practices for Black children, you got to be culturally relevant.
Absolutely. And there's so much research on that right now, right? Like that speaks to that point is that you have to connect with
Mhm.
students. And I don't mean just listening to hip hop music or eating the food
Right,
that they eat, right? But
right.
understanding the nuances that they bring in a classroom and adjusting your instruction and how you relate to them, right?
Mhm.
So, and I say it all the time, it's this fear that we have with the curriculum. Curriculum is prescribed by people sitting in an office who know nothing about the kids in your building or in your district.
Right.
But you, as the principal, as the teacher in that classroom, when you are connecting and creating culturally relevant, you know,
Right.
lesson information, you are pulling in that into a current curriculum. You could do it all on your own. That's a lot, that's a huge lift, right? And schools just don't have the time or the bandwidth to do that, but you can blend in those culturally relevant pieces into a curriculum,
Mhm. Yeah,
right?
and like, yeah, very much so. Like, when I was a principal, I will say I was honestly a principal who was very out the box.
Yeah,
And
me
because
too.
I don't like, to be honest, I don't like curriculum. I do not like prescribed curriculum
Yep.
because it becomes like a crutch where
Yes.
you don't realize like how to bring in your own flavor, how to bring in
Yes. Yes.
the resources. And so I would tell my teachers, and now in the position that I'm in now with actually training an entire district, we're going to forego this thing called curriculum, and we're going to start with the grassroots. And so it's a difficult task, but when people actually get it, like,
Mhm.
it's not about the curriculum, because curriculum comes and goes.
That's
It's
right.
about the skill. What is the skill that you are actually providing for your teachers? What's the
Yep.
actual skill that you
Yep.
want your kids to walk away from? And curriculum, that is the added piece, right?
Right.
So, really a heavy focus on culturally relevant literature, I think, is important. And just going back to like when I was a principal, one thing that I would have my teachers do is we literally, and I was in the trenches with them, but we really designed our own lessons centered
Yes.
around thematic units. And
Yep.
these thematic units, which was the cultural piece, we always started with knowledge of self,
Right.
always.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that.
And
Yeah,
making this, and from an interdisciplinary base. And
absolutely.
that I feel was the piece that really supported me in transforming my school sites.
Mhm.
And it was two schools, two elementary schools that I transformed in LAUSD. And I really feel like that was the piece. Like I was unwavering in the fact that we had to design curriculum, design lessons ourselves. We could not bank on this prescribed published piece of work.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, because your staff buy into it. If they're
right,
creating it, they're owning it, right? And with school leaders that I work with, their staff are always saying the same thing. Even in the district I'm in now, teachers are constantly saying, like, give us some autonomy, right?
right,
Allow us
right,
to teach and create lessons in the way that we know how, right? Of course,
right.
there have to be things in place to make sure they're aligned to standards because we want our kids to do
Mhm.
well. But we have to have the courage to live outside the box. And that's the only place equity really will occur, right? When
I
you talk about
agree.
this culturally relevant
Mhm.
piece.
I
Yeah.
agree because,
Mhm.
and I think like we just kind of been kind of almost like we've been indoctrinated and conditioned to believe that we can't trust our teachers.
Yep,
And
absolutely. Mhm.
because of that, that fear, and I like that you said courage, because of that fear that has come from different levels of administration, it has like literally funneled into the psyche of our teachers where they don't trust their own abilities and
Yep.
their own ability to actually teach.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it is so refreshing for me, like when you see this aha moment with teachers where they're like, okay, wait a minute, you're allowing me to teach? Like
Yeah, isn't that
like,
beautiful? Oh my goodness. I
right,
love
it's
that. I love that.
it's a freedom with that.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So, in your experience, what are the most significant challenges do you think schools face when striving for equity? Like, I know we talked about one of those just now, like this
Mhm,
fear of not, of living outside of the box or leading outside of the box. How do you suggest leaders mind that gap between, how you have this passion for what you do? Our leaders have to have that in schools as well. You did as a principal, I did as a principal. How
mhm.
do we how do you suggest that leaders mind the gap between intention and practice when it comes to equitable education?
Now, I think that it really starts with the principal, and
Mhm.
so I feel like the principal has to be literally has to be the person who stands on, "I am going to be the instructional leader in the space."
Yes.
Because
Yes.
if
Say
teachers
it again.
feel like their principal is asking them to do something that they too can do and that they're
Yep.
in the trenches with them, you get more buy-in because, I feel like oftentimes teachers feel weary about trying things because they feel like they might be dinged, they feel like they might be
Yeah. Yeah.
you might, receive a bad evaluation and they don't trust themselves. But as the instructional leader, if you're the person leading this work, and this requires some self-reflection from the instructional leader, because what is your why? And you have to
Yep.
start with that. If the principal understands that what their why is, and the why has to be connected to, of course, student achievement. But if we're trying to be transformational from a cultural lens, the principal, the instructional leader, has to be okay with having these hard conversations,
Yes.
have to be
Yes.
okay with
Mhm.
disrupting the status quo, and they have to be okay with doing what is right and good for their children.
Yes.
And
Yes.
when the
And sharing that with their staff.
right, and when the teachers see that,
Mhm.
and it's not just talk, but you're actually living it,
Oh,
I think
yeah.
that's the first step. And when it comes to equity, it becomes difficult because, especially now in this climate, many people are afraid because it becomes taboo words
Right.
if you're talking
Mm.
about equity. you
Yeah.
know, and
It's
realizing that,
actually banned in some states.
right,
Texas, Florida, right? It's banned in some states. You can't
right,
even, yeah, it's
and
ridiculous.
right, and it's like it becomes a revolutionary act,
Yeah,
you
it
know.
really does.
You know,
It really does.
yesterday I was working with a set of teachers who in our district they're pro black coordinators, and
Mhm.
I was sharing with them, like, you know, is the difference between being a revolutionary and oppressor, and you can be well intentioned and still be oppressive.
Yep.
So are you willing to be the revolutionary? And I
Right.
think that all of that is connected to what are we willing to do when it comes to establishing a cultural base at the school.
Yeah.
And for me, it literally began with the equity piece around social emotional learning and what the kids saw when they entered the school site every day. And
Yes.
that may seem like kind of common, right? But
Oh,
literally, what do they see? Just starting
yeah.
grassroots with that. If you see
And
a
when you say that, you mean even just walking, approaching the building on the school
right,
ground. What are
right,
you seeing? What are you entering? What space are you entering before you actually cross the threshold of that door?
exactly. And it's like,
Yes.
are they seeing excellence? Are they seeing images of themselves? Like, what are
Yes.
they actually seeing? And that is literally like where I began. Like,
Yeah.
I need my babies to see themselves as literally who they are,
Yeah. I love
intellectual
that. That's
geniuses.
beautiful. I love that. I love that. So let me you talked about like these terms, these words, right? Like equity being one of the words, and how they're banned in some states. Access, and I want to talk beyond the buzzwords. Okay, so
Okay.
access is often discussed as a crucial part of equity, right? But how do we ensure that access is genuinely like transformational and not just checking the box off, like, oh, we did this activity, check, we're equity focused, right? And we have access now, check. Can you share some strategies that you've seen work in practice?
hmm so I will say, I'm going to start with knowledge of self, right?
Hmm.
So, one of the things that I have done and that I have seen that really works is starting from a self reflection piece with all stakeholders and reflecting from the lens of who are you? And that
Yes.
may seem simple, but literally having a conversation and doing this activity of how do you define yourself?
Yep.
Who are you? And who
Hmm.
are you from this big picture of where you come from to what you've been through and who you are. And from that, then building on, now that we have a understanding of who you resonate with as who you are, how do we then take this and create something that is authentic for our children so that they authentically see themselves? And in regards to dealing with Black children, that's a conversation about Africa. You
Hmm.
have to start with, and when I say start there, it's a starting point and it's an ending point, because oftentimes when we're talking about this equity and access, we're only talking about, do you have do you have access to certain um, curriculums or certain books? And I'm talking about access from the notion of, that doesn't even matter if you don't have access of knowledge of self,
Right. Yep.
because
Yep.
that's where I start with, do you have an understanding of who you are from what you came from, this notion of Sankofa? Like, I'm always guided by Sankofa, like understanding that we can't move forward unless we have an understanding of who we are. And so with that, capacity building, because as you get understanding of who you are, how do I build that capacity in my teachers so that they feel comfortable and knowledgeable? How do I build that capacity and principals and other educational stakeholders where they feel comfortable with actually presenting information that is authentic
Yeah.
for the body that they're working with.
Yeah.
Because I just feel like with the buzzwords, or as I would say, these teacher words, these teacher
Yeah.
talks that we say,
Yeah. Yeah.
you lose sight of it. And like making it plain, how do you give kids what they need where they authentically see themselves so that they can be academically successful? And so
Yeah.
in doing that, you have to bring in a conversation about who they are, because we don't want them just to be good in school for the moment of
Yeah.
K-12. But
Yeah.
how do
Yeah.
we build you up that you have the tools to be successful citizens in this society?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And the thing about that too is, when we talk about working with scholars and having these real meaningful conversations about and developing their sense of self, connecting them to the kings and queens that they are,
Right.
it's really the adults in the building, starting with the leader first, has to be able to do that. And I talk about reflection in my book too as a consistent practice, right? Like
Right.
doing it all the time, because we can, at the beginning of the school year, you have all these wonderful PDs and you're doing all these great things, and then you're not a lot of schools are not consistent with it throughout the year. So this idea of reflecting and asking yourself, who am I in relationship to, you know my world, my space, the people
Mm-hmm.
who came before me, like who am I, is really grounding. And that is something that has to be consistent throughout the year for it to really stick, for it to really to have an impact the way you're talking
Right.
about, right? For this shift to really occur. I absolutely love that.
And it's almost like how we talk about PDSA cycles, like the plan, do, study,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
act. It's almost like you have to do that around reflecting, right?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
your practice. Like I'm constantly in a mode of growth.
Yep.
I'm never static. I'm constantly moving, and you have to literally reflect on yourself in a consistent basis.
Yeah, yep,
You know,
yeah, it's so true. I'm working with a school right now, and we talk about that, and the principal has committed to, purchasing journals for everyone, so every time they come together, they have this time. She's creating time in the agenda for them to reflect towards the end based on what
mhm,
they heard, how their day would like, just, um, and so it's important to carve that time in as a
right.
leader. Like, you can't just say, I need you to reflect as adults. You have to, as leaders, we have to create the time for that to occur,
Mhm.
right? Creating the safe space for that to occur, for those real meaningful conversations to happen. I absolutely love that. So,
And
what role?
I do really love how you said the safe space, because
Mhm,
sometimes we think, okay, well, it's PD time, so I have you here for 2 hours. Let me do this PD, and we don't take the time to stop and say, no, we don't need to focus on that academic piece right now. I need to focus on you
that's right. That's right.
and create the space where you feel comfortable in
Hmm.
being you.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. So, what role do you believe we as leaders play in transforming schools to be more equitable? Like, I know it sounds like a simple question, but for the people who are listening and watching the replay, to provide them with like some just the framework of like how leaders, the role that we play in creating equitable equitable schools, equitable environments, right? How can they align their leadership strengths, the things that they do well, and it's different for everyone, right, with a mission of equity and access?
So I definitely think the school leader is the instructional leader that has to lead the charge. Like it is not going to happen if the principal is not the person that's leading it.
Hmm.
And I feel that if we're looking at like certain things that should be in place, um, it's definitely embracing culture. It's definitely building the capacity of your teachers. So that's providing research-based resources and strategies, investing in books with your teachers, where you're actually doing literature circles with your teachers around
Yeah.
current research. That's
Yep. Yep.
and being clear that when we're picking researchers, if we have a predominantly Black population of students, it's important to pick researchers that have an experience with dealing with that particular student body. So not
Mhm.
just randomly picking researchers because they're the buzzwords or they're the new, they're the person that we've heard of for several times, but really looking at who are, if I'm dealing with Black students, who are the Black researchers that's done this work that I need
Mhm.
to tap into, right?
Mhm.
And I would also say it's important to look at the instructional program. So ensuring that there's a culturally relevant, linguistically responsive instructional program that standards align, but from an interdisciplinary lens. I think that's key because research tells us that, um, particularly Black children, and I would say also Black and Brown children, that they learn from a sociocentric lens, that they
Yep.
learn when they are in community,
Groups. That's
learn
right.
when they make the connections, that you're not teaching things in isolation or in
Yes.
silos, but that you're teaching from a circular base. So what's happening in ELA is connected to what's happening in math, is connected to what's happening in
Absolutely. Yes.
and so on and so forth. And being clear that as we're designing our instructional program, that we're looking at what research says about learning styles,
Yeah.
because we know, like from the work of like Dr. Asa Hilliard and others, we know that um, we cannot continue to function in our schools where it's very Eurocentric and linear, because
Mhm.
the majority of the student population in which and throughout the entire United States is very sociocentric. And so we have to design systems like that. And I think that's key. And ensuring that you cannot ever divorce yourself from data. So constantly looking at what the data says, because we can be doing all these things and it's still not working.
Right.
So
Yep. Yep.
ensuring that we're constantly looking at data and doing so, not waiting 6 weeks, not waiting 8 weeks when it's the beginning of the year assessment, the middle of the year assessment, the end of the year assessment, but really investing in data chalks or data chats where every 2 weeks you should be monitoring something.
Absolutely. And having deep, rich conversations around that data.
Exactly.
Yep.
And being okay with, we're tweaking this. So we
Yeah.
look at this, and it doesn't take a whole lot that you have to assess. You can focus on one key topic. Like
Mhm.
I'm just gonna say, let's say we're gonna focus on Greek and Latin roots. And so I'm gonna say like a fifth grade class, and we're gonna focus on three Greek and Latin roots, and we're also gonna focus on text complexity, like a writing sample.
Right.
I can focus on that. We come up with a plan and we're going to give a baseline assessment. We're going to teach. We're going to do all the things that we agree upon for 2 weeks. And then we're going to reassess and I'm going to look at it to see if it worked.
It's a data cycle. It's a data cycle. It's what I talk about all the time. A data cycle.
Exactly. And if it don't work, it didn't take 8 weeks.
Right. Right. Right.
you know? And
It's
so
a
I
mini
think
data cycle. Absolutely.
all of that is what makes the difference. But being
Yeah. Yeah.
clear that where the equitable piece is that you don't shy away from doing all these things and bringing in culture.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that circles back to having the courage to do that, like allowing your teachers to have the freedom to use it creativity and bring those
Exactly.
things in. So how do you think how can school leaders ensure that the changes that they are implementing for equity and access are sustainable over time, right? And then what practices or mindsets should the leaders adopt to maintain a momentum?
Okay. I would say I'm gonna start with the mindset. And
Okay.
the mindset literally for leaders has to be, we in this thing. Like literally something as simple as we are in this work for the babies. And the mindset is, even if I have to stand on this hill by myself, I'm gonna
Mhm.
do that because it's what's right and good for kids.
That's right.
And being clear that if it will require being a revolutionary, because
Absolutely.
the only way that you can disrupt status quo is you have to dismantle the status quo. And
Absolutely.
that's literally the mindset. And I would say
Mhm.
the way that it becomes lasting is as you have to build teacher capacity. You have to build their capacity. You
Yeah.
have to give them opportunities to engage in professional development. You have to give them opportunities to actually feel comfortable in trying and failing and trying and succeeding,
Yeah.
and giving them the resources and the research to support them. Because if
Yep.
not, if they don't feel like they are going to be supported, or they don't feel like they are getting the training that they need, it's not going to work. Like you,
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
like it literally is going to require a lot, but it's good, you know? Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
like, I mean, just think back to when you were a teacher and you think of like all of the trainings that you received, or the lack of training that you received, right? And when you
Mhm.
striving to like, if I only had access to this, because I think about
Yep.
that, like, I sat in many of professional developments that were not anything
Effective. Yeah.
effective,
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
was just like a check off, and it
Yep.
wasn't. I really believe that you have to also have in PD moments where you give the activity to actually have them test it out.
Right.
You know
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
those opportunities, I think, are the keys to allowing teachers to actually build their capacity and make it tangible to them.
Yeah. I love that idea of trying and failing and trying and failing, right? I talk about that too in my book around staying the course is, you know, regardless of the things that will deter you, if you fail or something didn't go right or it'll go the way you had intended it. Because failing really is just learning, right? It's
Right.
not really failing, you're just learning. And I talk about that, how you have to stay the course and just continue taking those little steps, like pick yourself up, dust yourself off, use the data that
Right.
says this went wrong and pivot, right? It's so important to do those things. I love that you mentioned that. There was something you mentioned about, mm, it escapes me right now, it'll come back. It's something you mentioned about how the school leader creating time. Yes, you said something about the leader needing to create the time for teachers to do this, right? Like to try things out and to I went to a the Virginia Alliance of Black School Educators conference this January, and it's funny to say this January and it's September, but it was January 2024, and they had a guest speaker. He is the actual superintendent at Buffalo Public Schools, upstate New York,
Mhm.
Dr. Brown, Lavelle Brown, and he said something that really stuck for me. He said, we in urban education, especially when we talk about black and brown kids, is this word urgency is always used. But he said, when you think about it, the word urgency makes us feel anxious. It makes us feel like we're always behind the eight ball. It makes us feel like we haven't caught up, like we're still behind, right? And nobody wants to feel that way in the work that we do. He said that is actually an oppressive word to say, to use that word in the education of our black and brown babies. He said the antithesis of that, the antidote of that for that is time, patience, love, understanding, right? Like the fact that you said that it connects so well to what he was saying is like, because again, as a principal for 14 years as well, I always felt like you, like we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do this. But naturally, you put guardrails up for what's good for you in your school, but you
Mhm.
still have that feeling of like this, I have catching up to do.
Mhm.
It's always there. But when we have to retrain ourselves so that if we're really talking about equity and access, if we keep going in the way that the system is created,
Right.
we will never catch up.
Right. I agree. And and I speak about that in my book as well. Like, you we're not trying to literally put ourselves into the system, but dismantling it. So we can't do the stuff. that we've been doing and expect to get a different outcome. And
Absolutely.
like in my book I talk about how as a principal, you have to give your teachers the time and the space to
Yes.
learn it. That this is not it,
Mhm.
the expectation is not that you're going to change it like this. The expectation is not that you have to make it happen within 2 months, but I'm going to literally go through the trenches with you and walk
Yes.
through the process with you, because we in for the long haul, not this
Yep.
fix, because it's never going to be, it's not going to be self-sustaining.
Right.
And so, but I think like what you said is like, we're so quick to feel like we got to change it like right now. And it doesn't last. You have like
Yeah.
a quick fix and it doesn't last. And it's okay to actually embrace the fact that you don't know. And I
Yes.
think that that's important too, because of this sense of urgency, particularly like in um in urban schools, people are constantly feeling like we're on this roller coaster ride, and we don't have the space or the luxury to just breathe, learn, and grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and I speak about that, in my book, that
Yeah.
you have to give people that space. And as you're building capacity in with your teachers or with your district level administrators, that is the key. Like, I'm in the
Mhm.
trenches with you, but the end game is long term, not just a
Yeah.
quick fix. And capacity building is part of that answer.
Yep. Yep, for sure. Oh my goodness. I hope Aspire Schools knows who they have, honey. And if they don't, tell them to call me because I'll let them know they got a good one with you. I hope that
Thank
you,
you.
and I'm not going to say hope. I know that the work that you're going to do with Aspire Schools and the leaders there is really going to, create some impact and change that we need. Um, and honey, you're in the home of the Black Panther Party, so you are in the right place. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. Tell the people how they can get in contact with you.
Okay, so this is Dr. Aresa Rochester, otherwise known as Dr. Rock. And you can actually get me at Dr. Rock Speaks at gmail.com. That's contacting me directly. Or you can also go onto my social media platforms, Dr. Rock Speaks.com. That is my website. You can connect to me there as well. And on Instagram, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn is Dr. Rock Speaks.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, courageous
Thank
school
you.
leaders. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope this conversation sparked new thoughts that help push you to reflect on how you can lead with purpose and bring real equity in your schools. Remember, the work starts with tough questions and honest reflection. So keep striving to close those gaps and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo, right? That's what we're talking about. Don't be afraid to do that. That's where the real change will happen. Your leadership has the power to transform lives. So keep moving forward with intention, one decision at a time. Okay. And I'll see you tomorrow with my fourth guest. But we want to say thank you so much to Dr. Rock for your time
Thank you.
today and your valuable input. I'm sure listeners and watchers will gain some great insights that they can go back into their respective places with. So thank you so much for that today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, hold on a second, okay?
Okay.